notes of the most important key points that will be discussed throughout this webinar, which we then also can share with you afterwards. So that's it as far as it concerns myself. The learning objectives, maybe these ones I just quickly want to go through them before handing over to Ned. The three main achievements that we would like to have, that's the knowledge of the basic principles and policies guiding the ILO's commitment to gender equality, see how these principles can be applied to project design, and how also to construct gender-sensitive indicators. The webinar came from a need that was analyzed by Pardev, did a whole needs analysis, and that's also the reason why these specific thematic webinars are organized. Ned, I'm going to pass it to you for a kind of an introduction, and then maybe we can have a short introduction round of the participants, and then we kick off our conversation, I would say. Ned, over to you.
Okay, so are we going? We should introduce ourselves first.
Yes,
so my name is Ned Lawton, and I'm the Chief Technical Advisor on Gender Equality at the Gender Equality and Diversity Branch. So basically, for the past 6 years, I've been managing technical cooperation projects devoted to promoting gender equality in the world of work. So I suppose that's the reason why I'm facilitating this webinar, and that I have quite a bit of experience in how to actually design and implement programs to promote gender equality.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ned. Can I ask Adrienne to unmute herself and to introduce her? Adrienne?
Hello, everyone. I'm Adrienne Cruz. I'm Senior Gender Specialist with the same branch as Ned, and I was very involved in helping to make this first webinar happen. So thank you so much to Ned, and also, of course, to our colleagues at ITC and also with Pardev.
Okay, thank you, Adrienne. Hand over to Pardev. Annika, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, I'm Annika Mokvist-Uggla. I'm representing Pardev. So I will be, well, adding if there's something about the appraisal process, for instance, and also listening out if there are needs for additional, support materials that you mentioned during the webinar. You can also be explicit about these things, and also come back to me after the webinar if there's anything you think Pardev should follow up on. So I'm looking forward to this.
Okay, thank you very much, Annika. Handing over to Shiku. Shiku, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, how are you?
Hello.
Shiku Semfuko. I'm with the ILO Dar es Salaam. I'm program assistant for the program unit.
Okay, thank you, Shiku. Can you just put your volume a little bit louder? We hear you from a far distance.
Unfortunately, this is the last.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
It sounds better now.
Yeah, if you talk closer to the microphone, it works as well. So,
okay, I'll do that.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. Sunita, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Sunita Lili. I'm working with the Domestic Workers Project. I used to work with Ned on basic.
Okay. Sunita, last thing is you were working on what exactly?
I am working as a National Project Coordinator for Domestic Workers Project,
okay,
which is RBSA funded, and I also used to work with Ned on the basic project. I'm continuing with the domestic workers thing.
Okay, excellent. Thanks a lot. Pierre-Olivier, you're taking note. Maybe a quick introduction from your side as well. Pierre-Olivier?
Sorry, yeah. What was your question, sir?
Just quick introduction from yourself, very quick. You were taking note of this webinar.
I'm glad to be part of this web seminar. As an intern at ITC, I'm responsible for having a look at how to manage the TC platform web page, and so yeah, I'm taking notes of the seminar to try to broadcast them and hoping that it's going to help somehow.
Okay. Thanks a lot. So we will make sure that these notes come back to you. So after this quick introduction round, we will still have later the chance to ask many more questions, but I would like to pass back the floor to Ned to kickstart, let's say, the webinar based on the original objectives that I already shared with you, and I will go to the next page with a why question. So Ned, back to you.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to, firstly is to say that I'm happy it's a small number of people, because I think, as Tom just said, that leads to a more conversational back and forth rather than just like a teacher imparting knowledge. And I think when if people have questions and we have a good conversation, I think all of us will get more out of the hour and a quarter that we have. The first thing, you'll have to excuse me if some of the things I say sound like I'm stating the obvious, but I've found from experience in promoting gender equality, both in the world of work or anywhere else, that it is sometimes important to state the obvious. Just to remind people that we're talking about very basic fundamental rights, fundamental human rights, and trying to give substance to the basic principle that women and men are equal, entitled to equal rights and equal chances for recruitment, advancement, and progression through the workforce. That's, as I say, that sounds like an obvious point, but I think it's an important thing to reflect on from the start. Is that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to ensure that what people are entitled to, which is a fair crack of the whip, for want of a better term, is actually there's some realistic way for that to happen in reality. Now, from the ILO's perspective, the ILO's very clear that promoting gender equality is a very basic principle of the decent work agenda. In programmatic terms, it's what's called a cross-cutting policy objective. So in other words, everything the ILO does on any subject matter is, according to the ILO's gender policy, meant to have a strong gender component. Now, what that means in practice is that everybody who's working in the ILO is and whether that be in regular budget or as we're all are, or today working on promoting technical cooperation, that it's all of our jobs to promote equality between women and men within the context of of the project that we're advancing. So, for example, if you're working on social protection, you must advance gender equality within that context. So that would mean ensuring that maternity protection is properly part of that, ensuring that creating a balance between work and family life is part of that, and so on and so forth. Similarly, working on occupational safety and health, we all must ensure that gender equality is properly mainstreamed into that. So we reflect on the fact that people, from a very basic level, people working on factory floors could be women or could be men, and that the safety mechanisms should take account of that. Then that issues like sexual harassment and violence against women are relevant to that subject matter. They're not something that just belongs in the gender box, but they're actually relevant to occupational safety and health, and so on and so forth. So the basic idea here is that everybody is responsible for it, and everybody must think of how you can ensure that through the ILO project that you're running, that you are also advancing equality between women and men. Now, in terms of the overriding normative framework for that, the ILO has what are commonly thought of as the 4 gender equality conventions, and I think it's a good way, reflecting on those 4 conventions is a good way to sort of look at the overall context of the ILO's policy on gender. The first is Equal Pay, Convention 100, which is from 1951. So that's obviously that women and men should be paid equally for work of equal value, which is commonly misunderstood to mean the same work. So obviously a very obvious part of the convention is that women and men should be paid the same for the same job. But the more complicated aspect of it is that they should be paid the same wage for work of equal value. Now there are many ways, different sort of theories and methodologies to work out how can you equate one job with another in terms of its value to society. And I won't get into that in this webinar, but it's just to alert you to the existence of that convention. I mean, an obvious example is why architects get paid more than nurses. You know, one sort of designs buildings, the other saves lives. You know, what's the value of each of those jobs to society? You know, so anyway. The second convention of relevance is the non-discrimination convention. There's 7 grounds under which discrimination is prohibited, one of which is gender. So that's pretty straightforward. Discriminating on the basis of sex is, under that convention, not allowed, and 172 countries have signed to that. So with the odd exception, most ILO member states have actually signed up to that convention. Now, the key for me in that convention, and something we'll come back to throughout the webinar, is this idea that you must be proactive. So it's not enough simply to not discriminate. But one must, under the terms of this convention, one must actually take proactive steps to ensure that all workers are treated equally. So in many cases that requires proactive steps to ensure that those who are not at a level playing field are given the assistance to bring them up to the level where they are at an equal level to other workers. So it's about actively promoting equality as well as simply not discriminating. And then the 2 other relevant conventions, which have fewer ratifications in both cases. About one is the Maternity Protection Convention, which speaks for itself. It's to promote adequate maternity protection for women workers. And then finally, there's a Convention on Workers with Family Responsibilities. So it's about balancing one's responsibilities at work with one's responsibilities, you know, to family, whether that be children or older relatives. Now, the manner in which the ILO's gender policy is designed, it essentially brings together two ways to do it. One is by what's called gender mainstreaming. So that's working to ensure that there's a gender dimension to whatever policy or whatever project is being rolled out. And that comes back to how I started when I started speaking, just to ensure that there is a gender dimension to whatever it is that you're working on. And I gave the examples then of occupational safety and health and social protection. So it's to find the entry points for gender and to both find the entry points and then to actually ensure that there is a practical way to ensure that women and men benefit equally from the project. And then the other aspect is gender-specific activities. That's promoting gender equality as an objective in and of itself. And that, you know, the projects like the one Sunita and I worked on, which is that the goal of the actual specific goal of the project is to promote gender equality. Now, I'll just talk briefly before we open for the first sort of questions on anything that I've said about 2 recent developments. The first are the Sustainable Development Goals, which, you know, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, that sort of give us the framework for development cooperation throughout the United Nations between now and 2030. And there is one Sustainable Development Goal, number 5, that's specifically devoted to women's economic gender equality and women's economic empowerment. So that sort of gives us an overriding sort of link into the wider UN framework. And then secondly, another sort of on the macro level, another shift that seems to be occurring and certainly has happened within the ILO is a shift away from just gender equality as an issue in its own right to gender equality and non-discrimination. I mean, many of you may be aware that in the reforms about 2 years ago, what used to be the Gender Bureau now is the Branch for Gender Equality and Non-Discrimination. So we don't simply work on promoting equality between women and men, but we work on promoting equality across the board, so disabled and non-disabled, promoting equality for Indigenous workers, working on LGBT rights, lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender workers. So it's become that gender equality is now contextualized within a broader framework of promoting equality and combating discrimination. You know, even the cross-cutting policy objective is not on gender equality now, it's gender equality and non-discrimination. So it's all within sort of a framework of working on these issues holistically together. Well, that's what the Director General wants us to do. Now, just to finish, sort of where I began, is the idea that this is promoting gender equality in the workplace is about a fundamental human right. You know, it's at a very basic level. It's about equality between human beings that all are, and so therefore it's about entitlements and rights. So that's the primary reason that the ILO does it, and there doesn't really need to be another reason. However, we do also advocate it through what's called the business case, which is a more kind of practical argument in a sense, and it's one that's being picked up on in particular by private industry, that essentially gender equality is good for business, that having a diverse workforce is a better way is better profitability for your company, essentially, because a diverse workforce is, you know, brings with it better ideas, more innovation, and it's a better mirror of the society through which you're trying to sell your goods and services to. So this economic argument is pushed a lot at the moment, and it's in terms of advocating for gender equality and women's economic empowerment, and it is important, and it's a useful argument to have. But it's important to remember that first and foremost, this is a matter of fundamental human rights, and in the case of the ILO, fundamental labour rights. So that's the basis from which we start. Now that's hopefully a bit of a sort of rambling, hopefully not too rambling, background into essentially why gender equality is important, and why we do it. So I'll stop there and see if what questions there may be on that before we get into the more nitty-gritty of actually how to do it and how it's measured and so on and so forth.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ned, for this introduction and setting the context and also the normative context in which this webinar will further elaborate, as you rightly mentioned, because we have still 2 questions to go that go much more into the specifics. But I think it's the right moment also to verify if everybody's still, let's say, if everything is clear, if there are some questions with relation to the context, with the different elements that were already sketched by Ned. Are there elements that you would like to add? Are there missing elements, or are there some things that you would like to clarify, or maybe already some questions that you have with relation to this introduction? And I also see that Gamu has joined us already, but the microphone is not yet activated. So I'll do maybe a quick round, and I'll do it like the other time. Starting with Adrienne. Adrienne, anything that we need to add to the conversation at this stage with relation to the context from your gender expertise points of view?
I would only add that we have an ILO action plan for gender equality, which our governing body receives reports about and guides us in its application. And that action plan does include indicators about the extent to which the projects mainstream gender, and it also tracks evaluation of those projects. So I think it's good for all of our colleagues to know that at the governing body level, the results are being reported, and then at the when your project is entered into the part of design proposal stage, all the way to the evaluation. And eval is being very careful now to put in its terms of reference for evaluators a full mainstreaming, look at. So just to let you know that this is actually being followed by our governing body and business owners like Pardev and others. So it's really good to know that because if you're mainstreaming gender, then you're going to be contributing towards good reporting to our governing mechanisms. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Adrienne, for this addition on there. Before I move to Annika, may I just ask Pierre-Olivier to mute your phone because I hear some background noise there. How you mute your phone is just next to your headphones. Just click on it so that there's a red. Okay. So we're moving to Pardev. Anything from the context, Annika, that you would like to add from your side?
No, I think I'll hold on until we get into the practicalities.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks. From the field, specifically, I start with Shiku. Any questions that you have there on the normative context?
No, not really, but I think he kind of broke off when he was talking that now there's a shift from gender mainstreaming, I think he said so, to gender equality and non-discrimination. I didn't get that part quite well.
Okay, so the shift from gender, you say, towards equality and non-discrimination, that recent shift, that's the last part of the slide there. Maybe that can be, maybe recap that element. What is exactly that you didn't get? Is it the general shift or some specifics around it?
No, actually, it's from my side, it kind of broke off. I didn't hear well.
Ah, okay. Maybe a quick recap we can do on that. Also, you will receive the notes with the key points on there. But that's maybe in a nutshell, what was it about, the shift, very quickly?
Well, it's the most importantly for us is to do with the structural reform of the office, so that what used to be the Gender Bureau, so we worked on gender equality, is now called the Gender Equality and Non-Discrimination Branch. So we're mandated to work on promoting gender equality, equality between disabled and non-disabled people, or workers rather, equality between Indigenous and non-Indigenous workers, and then we also work on lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender rights. So we're looking at discrimination in a broader sense than just gender equality. So it contextualizes gender equality in the broader context of promoting equality and non-discrimination per se. So it becomes one of a number of non-discrimination issues. That's the ILO's new approach to the issue, as reflected in the structural reform and with the new mandate of our branch. So a big part of that would be looking at multiple forms of discrimination. So the way in which disabled women workers suffer discrimination on two grounds that has a cumulative effect against them. And looking to mainstream gender equality into disability activism, looking to mainstream disability into gender activism, and so on and so forth. So it's a shift away from just working on gender equality as an issue on its own to working on gender as one aspect of a broader work on equality and non-discrimination on all grounds. Okay, thanks a lot. Then I'm moving to Sunita to ask if she has questions from her side. Sunita, any questions from you? Just unmute your phone before you speak, because it's still muted there. While we wait for Sunita to intervene, the others can at any time of the entire webinar also just put your questions into the chat box, which is right below. Just put your text to it and send the message to everyone. And as a facilitator, I will pick these questions up. Just the last try for Sunita. Sunita, can you hear us? Okay, she's in there. Sunita, can you hear us? Ned, can you click on her name to mute it? Sorry, I've got a really bad feedback now.
Sunita, there's quite a lot of noise out there. Ned, can you click on her name just to mute it? Can you click on it again so that it remains mute?
Yeah, well, there's two. I've clicked on both.
The other one as well.
It's not working, sorry, I keep clicking on it.
Okay. Okay, now. Sunita, can you okay, sorry for that.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of technical problem. Apologize for that because I don't have control of the administrator account at this stage, so I cannot intervene directly. Sunita, can you hear us right now?
I can hear you. I'm sorry for. Did I press anything wrong?
No, there was a little bit of an ambulance in the back or something like that. Do you have any specific questions for us at this stage, or can we move on?
See, I'm not very sure whether I should ask this now or later, but I still put it. I wanted to know more about how to make it as a business case. Is there enough evidence to promoting gender equality as a business case for industry?
Okay.
Okay, Ned, your call on that one.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence and growing evidence, in fact, of the business case for gender equality. We looked at this before International Women's Day, the year before last, in fact. Companies that have more women on their boards have higher profit margins. I can't remember the exact detail, but there's definitely evidence of that. Companies that are more diverse in every sense, maybe at gender equality in other ways, are doing better in terms of market share in their particular product that they're trying to sell. Classic examples of that are kind of the ones that have been leading the way are the IT firms like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, who specifically have, gender equality and diversity policies, and in some cases actually gender equality and diversity units. So they have units within the company that are there to monitor and promote equality and diversity in the ethos of the company, but also in terms of the staffing. So businesses have clicked into this, and it's definitely something that's been pushed. Even our Director General went to Davos to speak about it just almost 2 years ago, in January 2015. So there's a lot of evidence that keep hiring and retaining women staff, more women staff, and ensuring that there's greater gender equality within the company is good for the bottom line, profit-wise. So it's a good argument to make, but as I said when I spoke about it initially, it is, for me, and I would hope for the ILO, a supporting argument to the rights-based argument, rather than the argument that we make. I mean, they're not in contradiction with each other. The rights-based argument and the business case argument obviously support each other, because they come to the same outcome, that one should promote gender equality in the world of work. But it's important to ensure that the rights-based argument remains front and centre, because that's we're an organisation that is rights-based and devoted to social justice. Because a lot of the stuff I read now seems to only make the business case. So I think it's important that the ILO consider to continue to make both cases.
Okay. Thanks a
Now,
lot.
just while I'm on the subject, there is another sort of subset of the business case, if you like, which is in terms of poverty reduction strategies. There's research and evidence to show that women spend money in a more constructive manner than men. So in other words, women entrepreneurs, for example, are more likely to invest the profits of their business in their families and in their communities. So therefore, investing in women is from a sort of broader developmental angle, is more, it makes more strategic sense in terms of poverty reduction. I mean, if there is empirical evidence to support this from a number of countries, my only concern about that argument is that it feeds into gender stereotypes about women being, more responsible for the family and more caring, whereas men are a bit sort of loose when it comes to things like that. It just feeds into it feeds into the stereotypes that men are down the pub spending all the money, whereas women are at home using it to look after the children, and that's maybe not such a positive stereotype to be reinforcing. But then, that said, there is evidence to support that it's a reality, in fact. So.
Okay, thanks a lot. Specifically, if there are any, let's say, resources on the business case or on the rights-based argument that are not yet indicated, we can also upload them later on the platform, on the DC Learning platform. So for your consultation, if you have any interesting articles on the research that you're referring to, that might be also added on there so people can consult that. In function of the time, I would suggest, Ned, that we move on to the second question that you have.
Sunita just said she had something to add there. So
okay.
Maybe before.
Anika, back to you.
No, Sunita.
Oh, Sunita. Okay, yeah. Sunita.
Yeah, what I would like to say, Ned, what is often happening is when you try to put promoting gender equality as a business case, it is actually showing in a negative repercussions. For example, the very industry here hires more number of women in the shop floor. They prefer to hire more number of women in the manual work rather than hiring men. And the reason they do it is for women are more docile, women are not unionized, women are ready to work for lesser wages. So in a negative way, it is a business case for them.
Okay.
So, I mean, what I'm saying is that I have seen this kind of arguments also used to show in order to promote gender equality, sometimes this kind of arguments were also put that women will not leave the job, they don't have occupational mobility, so they will not leave the job soon. If men will be always aspiring to go up in the ladder, so they will be leaving the job. This kind of argument, women will not go for a trade union, women will not ask for more wages. This kind of articulation is also seen as a business case. So that's why I'm little skeptical about using this as a promoting gender equality and showing it as a business case. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. I think the distinction there is, I think if companies decide to hire women workers because they're seen as more compliant and docile, is obviously not promoting gender equality. I think, though, however, when companies have a specific strategy to promote it for, or promoting women entrepreneurs as a strategy for women's economic empowerment, so that women are actually in control of the resources, for example, is a way to go, is an aspect of promoting gender equality. But it's a good point that just firms that take an active policy to hire more women are not necessarily always doing it with gender equality in mind, and they may be doing it for reasons that are simply to further disempower women rather than to empower women. So, these things you need to consider that as well. Thanks, Anita, for that.
Okay. Thanks, Sunita. We have also a new guest here, Gamu. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, you're calling from where?
From Zimbabwe.
From Zimbabwe. Welcome to this webinar. We just sketched, let's say, the context, the gender context and the normative context, and now there was a recent discussion on the business case for gender that Ned was elaborating on. So anytime you would have a question on what's it, feel free to come in and ask whatever you want to ask. Ned, are you fine to move towards the next topic?
Yeah, sure, yeah. So
okay.
this is more to how do we apply these basic principles of the equality between women and men workers? How do we actually apply them practically to promoting gender equality as project designers or people that manage projects? I think the first thing to say is that it's not a choice. It's not like, as I think is often the perception, that adding a gender dimension to your project is a nice thing to do, and it will maybe make it more attractive to the donors, or something that adds an extra dimension to your project. It's actually an obligation on all of us to actually do it. So it's not something that we are encouraged to do. It's actually something that the governing body have requested us to do. And I'm referring specifically to a governing body decision from 2005 that mandates the office to work with constituents, donors and beneficiaries to ensure that all programs and projects systematically mainstream gender throughout the project cycle. Like after the webinar, I can put this up, the exact wording of this decision up on the, on the platform for you to read. But to sort of paraphrase it basically says that this must be done by involving both women and men in the consultations and analysis stage of the project, and the inclusion of data disaggregated by sex as a way to do that. The formulation of gender-sensitive strategies and objectives, including indicators, outputs, and activities. Ensuring that there's gender balance in the recruitment of project personnel, and in terms of the representation in the institutional structures of the project. And then finally, at the other end of the system, to ensure that there's the gender equality and gender expertise, as gender equality is mainstreamed into the TOR for the evaluation, and that the evaluators have expertise on gender as well. So that's, it's not, we're not doing it because we like it in a sense, although personally I do like to do it, but we have to do it. As ILO officials, it's part of our job to follow the decisions of the governing body, and one of the decisions is to ensure that gender is front and center of all development cooperation projects. Now, this is measured in a practical sense by Pardev, and Annika is here from the appraisal team. So all projects that are developed within the ILO actually get a score in terms of how they're doing on gender at the appraisal stage, from marker 1, which is basically no objectives, outcomes or outputs that aim to promote gender equality. So in other words, a project that's completely lacking in any attention to gender, or what can often be called a gender blind project, to marker 4, which is where the main stated objective is to promote gender equality, and the outcomes and activities are designed in that way. So that's the two ends. So marker 1 is basically totally gender blind, no references at all to gender, to marker 4, where the objective of the project is promoting gender equality. Now, we find that most of the projects that are appraised get either a marker 2 or a marker 3. I'll give you the exact wordings. Marker 2 is project does not include gender equality as an outcome, but some outputs and/or activities specifically address gender issues. And marker 3 is that it includes gender equality as an outcome or in the outcomes, and that some outputs and activities specifically address gender issues. Now, I think the difference there between marker 2 and marker 3 is a project that would score marker 2 at appraisal stage has actually thought about gender. So the person or the team of people developing the project proposal have said, yeah, we need to do this. We need to integrate gender into the project, and there's some effort to do that. There's usually often a paragraph, saying this project will gender mainstream. But then it kind of stops. So they've thought about it, but the actual strategy for doing something about it is not adequate. Whereas marker 3, I think, is they both think about it and develop an adequate strategy to do something about it, which is a significant difference, obviously. Now, we monitor this, and Adrian earlier mentioned the action plan, where they monitor various indicators, including this is one of the things that's monitored. And actually, what we do is we monitor what percentage of projects are actually getting a marker 3 or 4. So what percentage of projects are doing it properly? And we're pretty much static from where we were in 2010, actually. We went from, if my memory serves me right now, we went from sort of 24% were doing it and by 2013-14 we might have been up at 32%, and now in recent years we've kind of slid back down again to where we were at the start. So yeah, so and I think that's the big difference. That's the big stumbling block for me, as far as I see it, is that there's more and more people in the ILO, whether working on development cooperation or otherwise, that are aware that there is an ILO policy on this. They're aware that it must be done, but by the same token, they're doing it. So they're mentioning it in their project proposals and making some efforts to perhaps have a paragraph on it, but it's not being done in a kind of substantive way that actually is enough for it to actually make the grade in terms of being judged by the appraisal unit to be properly gender mainstreamed project. Maybe I'll stop there because there may be questions on those markers and on the governing body decision.
Okay, thank you. Maybe
it's quite you know, it's quite an intricate thing.
Maybe, as you mentioned, also the appraisal process and part of maybe also Annika has to add something there. So just checking, Anita, is there anything that you would like to add at this stage?
Well, I think Ned covered it well. I agree completely that the complexity for us is, of course, to differentiate between 2 and 3, but generally it's pretty clear what is a 3, where the approach is more ambitious, and what is a 2, where the approach is more limited. And often you get the feeling that it's added towards the end and not perhaps part of the analysis. But what I wonder from our side is how much support project originators can get from you and your colleagues, Ned, when they are struggling with these issues. And since that's at the appraisal, and when we say please communicate or get support from GED, it's quite late in the process, and it would be positive, of course, for if people knew how to, well, where to discuss these things at a much earlier stage.
Yeah.
Ned, you want to react directly, or?
Yeah, I can come back on that. Yeah, yeah. Obviously, I agree that if it's to be done properly, it needs to be front and center of the project designer or designer's minds from the beginning. I mean, we, as you say, Adrienne, who has left now to go to another meeting, but she and I quite regularly are asked to give comments on, you know, different project proposals. And it's better that we are, and I think, you know, we can make some kind of improvements, but to some degree it's kind of like sprinkling gender on something that's already cooked, you know, whereas if it's actually, like, continue my metaphor, if it's actually part of the dough from the start, it's much easier, you know, it's not, I'm not saying it's too late at that stage, because it's always better than not doing it, but it's better if people are, I would prefer if people contacted us saying we're you know, we're going to apply for this fund, and we're about to write up our first concept note, and asked us for help then. Be, I think, much better than here's our completed project document that we have to submit in 2 days. Can you add some gender to it? You know, because at that stage it's, you know, really just changing words and maybe adding. It's better at the start of the process, obviously.
Thanks, Ned. Maybe some comments from the field about some add on your metaphor instead of sprinkling. How can you be part of the dough? Maybe some questions related to that. Anyone who wants to come in here, feel free to unmute your phone, either Sunita, Gamu, or Chico. Whoever is first can get the microphone. Let's see. Any questions or feedback on the appraisal or anything else? Gamu, everything is clear?
Yeah, actually, just a comment there. I think from the statistics he's given us, it's staggering to think that maybe only 24% of the proposals submitted make the grade. And for me, maybe the question is, do we also have the adequate capacity or understanding within the various field offices departments where people understand why we should be doing this?
Well, I suppose that's why we're doing what we're doing today. You know, this webinar is one part of an attempt to, you know, bring people up to speed with, you know, how to do it, why we're doing it, which was the first part of the webinar, and now hopefully trying to explain why we're doing it. But what what often happens is that it's people that are interested and know a little bit about gender come to these, you know, to participate in these forums. For instance, Sunita, who works on gender in ILO Delhi, is participating in. I suspect both you and Chiku, you know, have some sort of interest and knowledge of gender, which is precisely why you've decided to join the webinar. Whereas really the people we need to talk to are the people that don't want to, are not interested in the webinar. Yes, so I don't know. That's kind of a circle that we need to square. I suppose one way would be to make the office, getting office directors to send, you know, to make these things compulsory it's quite a crude way to do it, but sometimes, you know, yeah. Yeah, but you're right, the statistics, it is quite glaring, you know. It's also just a lack of, I mean, we're a small unit here, the gender branch, and it's in terms of helping the appraisal unit, it's only Adrian and I that do it. And we only do it because of that lack of capacity. Part of only bring us into the play with this project of more than $1 million, and it's scoring at 1. Or, you know, so it's not, there's not enough, and I think the appraisal unit themselves are quite a small unit. So there's like at any one time in the ILO, there's more than 600 projects. So there's just not enough of us to go around. So obviously, a better strategy would be to, you know, for people to have the knowledge themselves so that they know how to do it. But there's plenty of tools to assist as well, you know. And, you know, we've done, I have them in front of me here that I was looking at in preparation. There's I'll put these up on the platform afterwards, but there's a how-to guide on gender equality and development cooperation, which when we developed it with PARDA, we made a point of making it, you know, not a lengthy document and something that you can just have beside you while you're, you know, it's very practical. It's not like a long discussion as to the whys and wherefores of gender equality, but actually how do I practically put it in my project. But it's getting people to use it. I think that's the thing. It's to get the mindset shift. In and of itself, I don't think it's particularly complicated. It's just you need the political will, and you need people to start thinking in a way, in a kind of gender equality, in a way, you know, putting on a pair of gender lenses and seeing things from that perspective. So more training is probably the best way, I would say.
Good. I'll take it down as an important note on how to reach those who are not into it yet, and also highlights also the capacity issue that was rightly mentioned by Gamu. Also taking the time into account a little bit of the webinar. Is there anything else, Ned, that needs to be added to the second question? Or
yeah, I'll just talk about just the second bullet there, which is strategic and practical gender needs. I think that's kind of important. I mean, these sort of simplistic dichotomies of strategic and practical, they're leaky. One leaks into the other to some extent, just for the purposes of explanation. Strategic gender needs I would define as things that require transformative change within society. So, for example, we could give, whereas a practical gender need is something that sort of accepts the realities of inequalities and tries to work around them to some degree. So we could take an example of a trade union meeting, and you're trying to ensure that there's more women participate in the trade unions and more women reach positions of leadership. Now, in terms of the strategic part of that requires, you know, long sort of working with the trade union to look at their HR policy, looking at the structures, looking at women's education. There's a lot of things that require, and you don't divorce that then from the wider society within which this is happening. So that's sort of more of a longer term thing of how we can work over time to increase the number of women members and women leadership. So there will be specific strategies for that. In terms of practical gender needs, it would be some very simple things like women, generally speaking, because of inequalities the reality is that more women look after children and have to cook the evening meal than men. So a practical way to ensure that there's more women at the meetings would be to not have the meeting at 7:30 in the evening. Because if you do that, women won't be able to come for very practical reasons because they have childcare responsibilities. So it's when you're doing, I suppose when you're designing a project, you need to think both of, how do we ensure that this project is transformational in the sense that it actually contributes to promoting gender equality by looking at the structures of society, why they are unequal, and what we can do about what we can do to advance equality over time largely through capacity building, through advocacy, through perhaps in some cases working directly with younger women to, train them in public speaking or in, building self-confidence. But then there is the practical side of things of how do we, accepting that those things will take a long time to achieve, how do we ensure that we reach women within the realities of things as they exist today? So that's more the practical side of things that you need to consider. I don't know if the people have any questions on that, the distinction between those two things before we move on.
Okay, any specific questions?
Or comments?
Or comments, yes. Chico?
Yeah. From my previous studies, I did a little bit on gender.
Can you speak up there, or put your mouth closer to the mic?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Okay. My understanding was that gender strategic needs are more of long-term goals.
Yeah.
And practical gender needs are the needs that can be met within a short time frame. But I'd like how can we I don't know how do we contextualize it, like for example with our tripartite partners? I mean, how do I identify these needs in terms of trade unions and stuff like that?
Well, it brings me in some way to the next question. I mean, like the practical needs, or how do we ensure women can participate? So it's, as you say, it's to some degree a distinction between short-term and long-term. So in the short term, you're not going to transform, you're not going to make structural changes to society and structural changes to women's subordinate economic position within, it's not going to be done within the sorry, can you still hear me? Sorry, my computer went into...
Yeah, we can hear you, Ned.
Sorry, it's just my computer. My computer went to the welcome page. So in terms of practical needs, as I said, to some degree, it's accepting that women might be working in particular areas, and to target those areas would be another way to look at it. So, for example, you're looking to reach women workers. And the majority of them work in the informal economy, or work in, let's say, in poorly paid jobs in the care sector. So in terms of addressing women's strategic or women's practical needs, it could be to target those sectors, target the informal economy, target the care sector, and try and improve working conditions in them precisely because women workers are working there. Now, if you were taking a more strategic approach, you'd be asking the question, well, hang on a minute, why are more women working in the informal economy, and what can we do about that? Why are more women in poorly paid sectors of the economy, and what can we do about that? So we need to provoke structural change that challenges these assumptions that women work in the care sector or women can only work in the informal economy. So that would be the strategic part, would be challenging those assumptions and doing something about it. Whereas in terms of practical gender needs, it would be, right, okay, well, that's a long term, that's going to be over decades, that particular approach. And we want to have results within the 2-year framework of our project. So to some degree, it involves accepting that reality and working within it for now. Now, you can do the two things simultaneously, obviously. You can, you could have a project that has 2 different strands. One is, you know, to try and improve working conditions in healthcare and in the informal economy within the next 2 years for women, you know, because women workers are primarily there, while simultaneously questioning, you know, working to create a situation where women have more options than informal economy or working in the care economy. Does that, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And Sunita, you had a question to ask as well?
Yeah, can I ask I mean, it's not a question actually. It's kind of, I wanted to share with you people something which, when we are working on gender, we grapple with. For example, if it is domestic workers or garment workers, any sector workers, which is predominant number of women workers, when we try to put gender as a concern, then what we get to hear is about there are several economic issues like class issues which need to be addressed, and gender is not a priority at this moment. For example, minimum wages is always prioritized over the sexual harassment issues. Am I clear?
Yeah, I hear your point. Yeah.
So this kind of in prioritizing the issues, even in the proposal writing, often I see there is a conflict between putting gender concerns and the economic concerns at one place. So how to resolve that? As a strategy, what strategy we need to adopt in that kind of cases when we are trying to mainstream gender or whatever?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's within your, sorry, if it's within, sorry, is that feedback coming from me? Oh, no, there we go.
Sunita, yeah.
Okay, if it's within, you know, if you're having those debates internally within the ILO, I mean, it's the decision of the governing body, which I think you need to press your mic again. Do you need to mute your mics, Sunita? Yeah. If you're having those discussions internally, well, I mean, that's not how the ILO policy is. It's not that gender equality is a priority when other things aren't. That's not what the ILO policy or the governing body have asked us to do. The decision of the governing body and the policy of the ILO is that gender equality is always a priority and has to be in every project. So it's not like we can do gender when we have time or when other things are less important. It's meant to be there irrespective. And I mean, that's been signed off on by both all ILO. It's the instructions of the Director General to us as ILO officials, but all the constituents have signed up to it too, in terms of the governing body decision. So I realize that's the theoretical answer. In practical terms, it can be things take a different turn, but a good way to go. I mean, the governing body decision is 1 page, and you can just, I mean, it's an easy thing to quote.
Okay.
So it shouldn't be a competing priority with other things. In fact, you know, if you're looking at different subject matters, you can only really address something effectively if you include a gender dimension. So it's not something that is in challenge to other things. It will actually help you achieve other things. So if you're trying to promote wages, or you're trying, you know, fair wages, or you're trying to promote better labour inspection, or you're trying to promote freedom of association, whatever particular aspect of the ILO's mandate it is, bringing a gender dimension to it will actually make it more effective. It's not, it won't take away from the primary goal. It will actually enhance the primary goal. That's the thing to remember.
Okay. Thanks. That's also in view of the time. Do you think we can already move towards the last part of the webinar? Or?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay, good. I'll click on the next slide.
So yeah, this is sort of the more down and dirty practical side of things of actually when you come to your log frame. You know, which, and as Adrian, one of my favorite quotes from Adrian is what gets measured gets done. Or more to the point, what gets, if you haven't done it, it becomes very apparent that you haven't. So when she and I review project proposals from a gender perspective, the thing we look at the most are the indicators, because that's really the most important part. That's when the project is being evaluated. It'll be evaluated against that. Has it achieved the targets that it set itself? Now, on a more sort of practical side, one thing that we often find when looking at those log frames is there seems to be a lot, and I'm sure in the appraisal unit they find that as well, that there seems to be a bit of confusion around what an indicator is as opposed to an outcome and as opposed to an output. So, I mean, there's probably scope for a whole webinar in terms of that subject, which I'm sure will be had with people from Pardiv at some point. But briefly speaking, an indicator is something that is, you know, it's something that is measurable. So in other words, you have to actually be able to measure A, whether something happened, or B, whether the degree to which something happened. Now, for example, if you look at the three different things, like you have an objective, an outcome, and an indicator, you might have an objective to promote freedom of association for women workers. That would be the objective of your project. An outcome could be that you run workshops with women and men workers on why freedom of association is important for promoting women workers' rights. So that would be the output. And then in terms of the indicator could be a simple thing like how many women and how many men attended those workshops. But that only really gives you, that gives you some information as to what the effectiveness of the project. But a better indicator would be that if you had project evaluation or workshop evaluation forms at the end, and you recorded how many of the people that participated at the workshops actually gained specific knowledge from it as perceived by themselves. So, how many people were broadly speaking felt that the workshop was useful to them and what they were trying to get out of it. So that's just in terms of what's an objective, an outcome, and an indicator, because there's quite a bit of confusion around that. Very briefly, I mean, there's much more that could be said about that. Then within indicators, you have another distinction between quantitative indicators and qualitative indicators. Quantitative indicators are obviously much easier to measure because they're it's something that you can easily convert into a numerical expression. So quantitative indicators would be, for instance, the numbers of women and men trained. And you might, in terms of project design, if you're running a project, let's say on enterprise, starting and forming an enterprise, you're working with constituents on that, or you're working, it's like you may include something that a minimum of 40% of the participants must be women. Or equally, if you're running a workshop on promoting the care economy, you could equally say that a minimum of 40% of the participants must be men. It's basically a way to, and in terms of measurement, it's pretty easy because you just literally count the amount of people that are attending. Qualitative indicators are a more difficult thing because you're measuring changes in society which are not necessarily easy to express. Well, by definition, they can't be expressed numerically, but they're not easy to report on because you're looking at attitudinal change, for example. How do you measure that? Which is a big part of gender equality. One way an obvious way to do that is by surveys at the end of the project and with the key stakeholders as to what they, you have your baseline data and then you return to the same people at the end and see, whether there has been attitudinal change. But obviously it's much more difficult to measure. In terms of indicator design, You know, another example, if you're working on social protection, is, you know, ensuring that any presentation that you're giving on holistic social protection includes gender relevant issues like maternity protection, working hours for women and men, so on and so forth, the degree of people that are in part-time work, the percentage of them that are women, those kind of things. Well, no, that would actually be a quantitative indicator, excuse me. Yeah, it's hard to explain within sort of 10 minutes the difference in qualitative and quantitative indicators. Broadly speaking, as the name would suggest, quantitative is something that can be numerically expressed. Qualitative is more about attitudinal change, which is more difficult to measure. I mean, we have 10 minutes left. I think I should probably stop and ask.
Maybe I can add just to refer to a how-to guide we have on indicators, and that we are looking at this now to also do an interactive video on smart indicators, assumptions, and risks. And maybe in connection with that, we can collaborate a little bit with you, Ned, to see if we can add a section on gender, or perhaps even do a interactive video on smart gender indicators.
Yeah.
Maybe we can keep that in mind as well as we develop further tools.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that I think we should. I mean, we should all. I mean, there should be any of these things should have some reference to gender. You know, and particularly in terms of indicators. But a very easy one, I mean, is the one that you see. You know, you think it would be easier. It's quite easy to do, and you see it least often is measuring people. You know, number of people, a very easy way to just disaggregate that as number of women and number of men. Surprisingly, a lot of people are quite resistant to doing that, whereas it's a very easy thing to do. You know, it's just this counting exercise, and it gives you some sense of, well, probably a good sense in the sense of the outreach of the project to women and men.
Okay. Anything else, Annika?
No, I just wanted to concur. That was all. I agree.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Any other last questions on the final round on the indicator section that we have done as a third part of this webinar? Feel free to jump in with your questions or comments or remarks or clarification. Chiku?
Maybe it's just a comment, but you know, when we're reviewing maybe even concept notes or project documents, most of the time, people or program managers they only put quantitative indicators on gender. I think qualitative is a little bit hard to report on.
Yeah. Well, it's also hard. They're hard to design as well. Because you're, as I said, you're basically trying to measure attitudinal changes, but they're, which is tricky, yeah. And the other thing is that they don't tend to happen. Those kind of structural changes don't tend to happen in the lifetime of a project. You know, they're not something that changes over 2 or 3 years. They're more these kind of changes. You know, you can make some progress in that time, but not substantive progress tends to take longer. But you can ensure, like, you know, that just bringing a gender dimension at all to the things in a way is bringing a qualitative gender angle to it. You know, to the end. You know, even just having you know, very basic things like, you know, the indicator will be so many people trained in occupational safety and health. Even, I know it sounds very simplistic, but just the word gender responsive before the words occupational safety and health, because that then alerts people who are employed by the project to, oh, we have to do it in a gender way, and then they'll, you know, they look into Yeah.
Okay, good. Any other comments or final remarks before we move to our wrap-up part? This is almost your last chance to intervene.
Okay. So just to conclude, then, it's you know, on one level it is quite complicated. On another level, it really isn't. It's about ensuring that the basic principle that women and men are equal to each other is given practical effect. So when you're designing your project and you're thinking what do I want the impact of this project to be? It's like, well, okay, what do I want the impact of this project to be for women workers and for men workers? And is the impact likely to be different if I do it this way? And how do I do it in a way that actually benefits both? Just even asking, even setting yourself those questions at the start will make a big difference. Just to go into it with the mindset of the gender equality and promoting equality between women and men is a relevant factor in this project. That will lead you down, inevitably will lead you down positive paths that not considering it wouldn't. So a lot of it is really about the political will and applying the mindset of promoting gender equality to what you're doing. And then the technical side of things, the more how to design indicators, that sort of stuff will follow if you adopt that approach, I think. But it's largely about wanting to do it in a real way. So we need to get people along to these webinars who don't traditionally do it, and I suspect everybody who is listening actually does already. But that's another challenge that we're facing.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Ned, for these final, let's say, reflections. And indeed, as we have said, it's a recorded webinar, so we might have a second chance to reach out those ones who really need it to integrate gender in their projects. Thanks a lot to also the participant group for your comments, reflections, and so on. We have been noting down the different inputs. As a quick follow-up, we will make the recording available in the DC Learning platform. Also the notes of this webinar and also some of the resources that were mentioned throughout the webinar, the studies, the how-to guides, and so on. And if there might be still some specific questions there, don't hesitate to follow up with either Ned or someone here from the ITC-ILO team. We will try to accommodate your request as part of this regional learning journey. So thanks a lot from my part. Thanks a lot, Ned, for being the expert and facilitator of this webinar. A lot of useful points out here. And as we have said at the beginning, a small group with a rich and interesting conversation. So I will greet you from Turin, and I wish you all the best.
All right. Cheers. Thanks, Tom, and thanks to everybody for taking part.
Okay, thanks. Ned, just a practical one. Can you click again on the stop recording button so that we have